Anime games. Pretty much all of them are bad, and the only one I can think of that has any enjoyment value is Dragon Ball FighterZ. But that's only because there are 1,000 Dragon Ball games every year, so one was bound to be good.
And even then, the character roster is limited when you consider how great Toriyama's designs are. I love Goku, but I don't need 20 versions of him taking up space for other characters we could have had.
One Piece is the most popular manga by a long shot, and I couldn't tell you a single well-received game title in it.
Naruto was one of the first anime to make it big with Western audiences, and the best game it has to offer is painfully mediocre.
And My Hero Academia shook up the anime community and Western audiences. But the best we got was this.
Hey, Alright, he's hitting me with the Dookie Rocks back to back. I've just got it. No.
But honestly, the anime that got it the worst, the anime with all the potential for a masterful game and none of the talent working behind it is... Oh, who am I kidding? You guys already read the title. You know it's Attack on Titan. It's Attack on Titan.
One of the most beloved, original, and popular shows in not only the history of anime, but in general. There was a point where people recommended the show to non-anime viewers as the Game of Thrones of anime. And still, with all of that, the best officially licensed title we've gotten looks like this.
I don't think it's a controversial statement to say this shouldn't be our standards for anime games. So, for a bit of fun and wishful thinking, we've created a pitch for what we would consider the perfect anime game with two disclaimers. One, it has to respect the source material. There are a couple ways of doing this. Most obvious is just respecting the canon. If the game is set after a character's death, then the character has to stay dead.
Sorry.
Less obviously is the game being a part of the genre that works against the show. So, a 2D fighting game where everyone is a Titan might be fun, but wouldn't fit the grand scale of Attack on Titan. And two, the game has to be both reasonable and feasible. That's why all our ideas are based on other proven works to ground it in reality. Even though I'm pretty sure Bandai could afford to innovate in their release. So, with all that being said, let's make the perfect Attack on Titan game. Starting with story.
Anime game stories follow one of two paths. The common option is following the narrative of the series, and less likely is making a new story altogether. This in itself is not a bad thing, however, we're yet to see this executed well. Following the narrative of a series sounds like a good idea, until you realize even the most action-packed anime you've seen still doesn't have anywhere near enough action for it to still be a fun game. It's why we get random intervals of filler fights in anime games to pad out the content. Making an original story, on the other hand, comes with its own issues, as writers for anime games often aren't very good or innovative in their ideas. It also comes with its own slice of issues when the writer idealizes the characters they're writing. Whilst not an anime game, the new Avengers title has this issue tenfold. No one here is a real person, but rather a vessel to show you how cool the famous superheroes are. It's less of a game and more of a marketing ploy to get you to want to buy figures. So, how does this apply to the Attack on Titan games we've gotten so far?
Well, every Attack on Titan game we've gotten has attempted to do the first option, follow the narrative, without any effort to actually make it entertaining. The latest game attempted to do something slightly unique with the created character in the mix, but the story is still pretty much the same thing with added on ego strokes as everyone around you talks about how great a person you are. It's all at the cost of characters' actual personalities to pander to you in hopes you will enjoy the game because Levi thinks you're as cool as you think he is. It attempts to be innovative towards the end with a sacrifice, but even that falls flat due to the poor execution in making the bond between the main characters and everyone else feel genuine. So, what would be the perfect story for an Attack on Titan game? Well, we'd say it's one disconnected from the main story and characters.
This is probably the biggest leap for anyone to get on board, but it's the best solution to all of these problems. Star Wars was once a beloved movie franchise, believe it or not, but its games were also infamous regardless of if the central characters in the films were in it. In fact, the best games were the ones with the fewest connections to them, and that's because the world of Star Wars was what made it what it was. The lightsabers, the Force, and space is what compelled so many to seek out more entertainment around it. If people wanted to see Luke and Vader's journey, they would just watch the films, but if they wanted to see a new experience in its world, they could do that through the games. So why not make it the same here? Attack on Titan's world is both just as interesting and diverse as the characters that inhabit it. So we thought, why don't we use it to its strength? And came up with this setup.
The game would follow a research group who have been sent outside the walls in hopes of discovering new information around the Titans, as well as protecting makeshift borders in hopes of expanding the walls of the kingdom outward safely. Setting the game far outside the walls comes with many benefits for several reasons. Most obviously, it allows for great variety in the map design, as we could have forests, mountains, villages, deserts, and more. It also means the game can have its own set of mysteries, villains, and conflicts that won't contradict the series. It's partly why we withheld the timeline of the game, as it could theoretically be set in any time period, so long as vital elements like 3D maneuver gear had already been established. The playable character of the game should either be an original character or character created. Either is fine, but for the sake of simplifying, we're going to assume that they're character created, considering the latest game shows there's a market for it. So, you travel from the walls as a survey corps recruit to assist the newly constructed research base. A good foundation to build a tailored narrative. But what about gameplay? Let's look at the base first.
Similar to Attack on Titan, Monster Hunter is all about fighting larger than life beasts and reporting back to base after each scouting, and we want to emulate something along those lines. The base is where you accept quests, prepare for them, as well as just casually bond with the NPCs. As it's a research base, it's also where you can discover new information on your enemies to make your next outing easier. There are of course clear differences between Monster Hunter and Attack on Titan. Titans can't be used to craft weapons, but they can be used as a reward to grow the research base's numbers, strength, and size. The concept would be you're providing results, so you're provided more assistance with your efforts as you progress. Which brings us to another big gameplay mechanic and difference from Monster Hunter. Each outing comes with your own customizable squad that can be upgraded through completing quests and bonding with them in the base. So instead of upgrading one character's armor set, you're upgrading a team's skill dynamic, which is more in line with being an army member. So that's everything in the base. What would the outings actually look like? The meat of the gameplay.
For this example, we're going to use the woods as a good backdrop for a map, as it has plenty of high tether points and battles that are set there in the series. Each outing begins with you and your allies scouting the perimeters across the map, similar to Monster Hunter. However, there will be no form of scout flies or artificial glow highlighting the tracking area. The whole experience relies on sound and actual deduction. To find a Titan, you have to hear out for screams or branches that have been snapped in the area. Branches will be the greatest indicator, as this is where most players will be spending their time due to Attack on Titan's other unique feature, the 3D maneuver gear. And that brings us to the second game for reference, Spider-Man. Who would have guessed?
It's definitely not an original idea, but one that needs to be said again, because the best traversal we've gotten in an Attack on Titan game is entirely fan-made, and it looks and feels amazing. Double jumping, hooking and reeling, pre-firing, hook splitting, mid-air redirection, swinging, side burst, backward and forward burst, downward and upward bursts. All of this together really makes you feel like you're Attack on Titan. Wait. However, there's one element I change in an officially licensed title, the complexity of the movement, and that's where Spider-Man PS4 comes in, because the movement in that game is incredibly simplified, to its detriment. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but the two mesh together balance out the issues in both games. Spider-Man's overly simplified swinging is only an issue because there are no challenges compensating for its simplicity. When you're swinging, you're safe. You may swing with the exaggerated swagger of a black teen, but no one is there to see it. And on the other hand, Attack on Titan's fan game has too many complications, whilst also expecting it to be possible to slay difficult enemies with narrow weak spots. The perfect balance is to make traversing from point A to B a simple endeavor, but add complexities through positioning and spatial awareness. It would allow newcomers to get comfortable with the controls, so they pick off enemies one by one before retreating, whilst also letting experts cut down enemies without breaking momentum. And that brings us to the actual combat segments. What would they look like?
Whilst not a direct inspiration, the size of and mindset towards the battle in Shadow of the Colossus is a great foundation for the Titans. Facing off against them should feel grand, even in the simplest encounters, and the only effective method of defeating them is through their weak points. However, rather than spending most combat encounters looking up as you do in Colossus, here you'll be looking down at the Titans from above. This would not only allow you to analyze the actual fight ahead, as you would typically be facing more than one enemy at a time, it would also grant the player a sense of power as they dominate the fields. Imitating the bloody battlefields in the series, combat has to be heavy, short bursts of adrenaline-fueled action. One attack would be all it takes to kill the enemy. The other viable option is cutting off limbs to leave a greater opening for the Nate, but it would make you vulnerable to grabs and stumping. The more experienced players would always be moving to avoid Titan attacks and position themselves to strike. To incentivize players towards this more aggressive playstyle, they could receive attack and speed buffs the more they stay in the air, evading and attacking. So, how would you attack?
Similar to the fan game, attacking needs to be simple, but a choice you commit to. You would reel in towards a Titan, hold down the attack, and position yourself. You let go to swing. Timing would be rewarded as you do more damage if you release on a countdown. Once again, simplicity is key to ensuring both the inexperienced and pros can slay the Titans. Even so, there's only so much you can do before needing to retreat, as weapons will dull and fuel will run out. If you manage to return successfully, you can restock and fuel up before jumping back into the battlefield. But if you fail, this is where it shifts from an epic high fantasy to a terrifying horror as you lack any sense of momentum or defense. The best you can do is run, but you can never outrun a Titan. The hunter becomes the hunted. Those are all of our base ideas on what we would consider follows our criteria. Monster Hunter, Spider-Man, and Shadow of the Colossus are all marketable, feasibly made games that would be enhanced by Attack on Titan's world building. It's honestly the bare minimum for what we'd expect from an average game. There's a lot more complexity to discuss, like enemy and weapon variety, as well as more story details, but in order to not drag the video out too long, we thought it was for the best to put a pin in it here.
So, what do you think of our little pitch? Anything you like or dislike? Do you have an entirely new concept for the perfect Attack on Titan game? Or is there an anime that still needs a good game adaptation you'd like us to talk about? Whatever it is, let us know in the comments below.
And be sure to like, subscribe, and share the video to not only help us, but also hopefully incite some more creative games to come one step at a time. We've been OwlBerry. Peace.
You will